NATO had agreed two key compromises.
For them, I think important points were that this whole thing would happen under UN auspices, and secondly that Kosovo would remain part of Yugoslavia.
That made the deal acceptable to the Russians. It also gave Milosevic something that had not been on offer before the bombing started, a UN mandate.
There was a sort of sigh of relief, and I congratulated Chernomyrdin and hugged him in a brotherly fashion.
But the relief was premature. The Russian military had expected their own sector of Kosovo, independent of NATO. They now felt double-crossed.
Я чувствовал себя тоже как побежденный. Вот у меня такое ощущение было, именно как побежденный. Я ощущал, что зло побеждает добро.
They decided to try to take what they'd been denied. Russian troops stationed in Bosnia rolled towards Kosovo.
They had informally conveyed information that they might be an advance party for an airborne operation that would go into Priština airfield and potentially partition the country.
The question was, could they be stopped?
I called Secretary General and told him what the circumstances were. We talked about what the risks were and what might happen if the Russians got there. He said, of course you have to get to the airport. And I said, do you consider that I have the authority to do this? Of course you do. You have transfer of authority.
There was a way to stop the Russians. In a Macedonian cornfield, Clark put 500 British and French paratroopers on immediate standby to launch an airborne assault. But Clark's British subordinate told him the plan risked sparking World War III.
We were standing into a possibility, let me put it no more strongly than that, a possibility of confrontation with the Russian contingent, which seemed to me probably not the right way to start off a relationship with Russians who were going to become part of my command.
British and French objections thwarted Clark's plans. The 200 Russian troops passed through Kosovo and were greeted as liberating heroes by local Serbs. They took the airport unopposed. The world watched nervously. The Russians were planning to fly in thousands of paratroopers who would then cut Kosovo in half, leaving Milosevic in control of the north.
Такие планы Министерства обороны, такие предложения Министерство обороны готовило и готово было реализовать. По крайней мере, 3 аэродрома были готовы для того, чтобы в течение 2 часов залетели самолеты с десантным батальоном.
There was concern that there may be Russian aircraft inbound, and that one answer to this would be to block the runways at Priština airfield, and what was looked at was putting some armour tanks on the runway.
Were you in favour of that?
I believed it was an appropriate course of action.
But Clark's plan was again overruled by Britain. Instead, Clark asked neighbouring countries to try to stop Russian aircraft flying towards Kosovo. The Romanian defence minister took great pleasure in warning Moscow not to try to fly over his country.
He said you could do that. Of course, we would be obliged to send an aircraft up to intercept your aircraft, and there are only 2 buttons on our aircraft, and if the pilot pushes the wrong one, he'll shoot down your transport plane with all of these people on board. Of course, that would be a crime, he said, and he would be prosecuted under our law. He'd be convicted. He would be sent to jail for 7 years. But he would also be a national hero.
June the 12th, 1999, Force Entry Day. With the agreement of Slobodan Milosevic, 50,000 NATO troops entered Yugoslavia at last. They went more in relief than in triumph. It had taken 78 days of non-stop bombing. Militarily undefeated and defiant to the last, the Serb forces who so laid waste to Kosovo pulled out unimpeded and unpunished for what they'd done.